Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into some seriously fascinating source material. We're going to explore a really compelling critique of modern Western economics, and we're looking at it through the lens of Daesoon thought. It explores this bold, kind of striking idea. What if our contemporary economic systems are fundamentally failing because they operate as straight, dead-end lines instead of continuous cycles? So let's jump right in and see how an ancient philosophical perspective might actually hold the key to fixing our modern economic gridlock.
Here's the big question framing our entire analysis today. What if modern capitalism is actually failing because it literally forgot how to circulate? The source text argues that Western economic models, libertarianism, social contractarianism, utilitarianism, communitarianism, they were incredibly successful at stimulating human growth at first, but ultimately they broke down into four very distinct modern crises. Why? Because they lack a continuous loop. They push all this energy forward, but they don't have any mechanism to circle it back, and that leaves us economically stranded.
To figure out how to fix this, we're going to follow a structured problem-solution journey, mapping out these four economic crises. We'll cover restoring motivation, regenerating ethics, harmonizing ideologies, and finally, overcoming the environmental crisis. Let's get right into number one.
Section 1 is restoring motivation, specifically looking at the concept of yumyang hapdak. So our first crisis is the loss of economic motivation. The text points out that under our current systems, society has essentially devolved into what it calls a lottery capitalism. Think about it. Massive wealth is treated like a giant casino game, and everyday folks feel completely stripped of any true spiritual drive. We end up relying on pure chance rather than our own hard work or agency. Basically, we've just lost our motivation.
To solve this, Daesoon thought introduces a really brilliant concept called yumyang hapdak, which means the union of yin and yang virtue. The text uses this fantastic visual metaphor here. It talks about placing water, representing ethics, over fire, representing material gain. Now, in nature, if you put fire over water, the fire just burns upward and the water just sits there doing nothing. But if you place water over the fire, the water boils, it creates steam, and it generates this incredibly powerful, automatically circulating energy.
The contrast here in real-world application is absolutely fascinating. Western libertarianism tends to chase individual material gain first. It basically puts the fire on top. But on the flip side, Daesoon's deistic approach argues that true sustainable wealth is actually generated by fulfilling the needs of others first. It is an ethics-first approach that actually jumpstarts the whole economic engine.
So how do we activate this circulation? Well, the source text introduces a powerful recurring motif that we're going to see a lot of today. We simply need to change the order by one single step. Instead of waiting to receive wealth before we give, we shift to step 1, give first, and then step 2, prosper later.
Making this structural shift absolutely doesn't diminish your personal freedom or wealth. In fact, it expands it. By giving first, you aren't losing out. You're actually initiating a cycle that inevitably circles right back to you, which completely restores our fundamental economic motivation.
Moving on to Section 2, Regenerating Ethics through Seinen Jawa. Here we're examining the collapse of economic ethics. The text basically diagnoses our current state as an era of ethical nihilism. This is caused by inflexible social contractarianism, where people really only do the bare minimum required by law or a contract, and that just leaves our ethical landscape completely barren.
The solution presented here is Seinen Janhua, which translates to the harmony between spirits and humans. The source describes this as working a lot like a giant complex line of dominoes. Imagine an invisible distribution network of divine spirits. It's a massive feedback loop where your initial actions, whether they're good or bad, don't just vanish into thin air. They amplify or they diminish, and they inevitably return right back to the source, meaning they return to you.
There's this remarkable quote from the Zhang that beautifully grounds this whole philosophy. It says, "Though they may not know it, their divine spirits will know it, and the virtue will return to you." The assurance here is pretty profound. Even if your human peers completely miss your good deeds, or if they just forget to say thank you, the complex system of the universe ensures that virtue still makes its way back. It acts as the ultimate ethical safety net.
And here again, we see that motif. We change the order by one step. Instead of waiting around to receive grace or fair treatment from others before we act justly, which honestly often leads to deep resentment, we output grace first. This establishes what the text calls a state of no resentment right from the start. That sets up the perfect initial conditions for that complex feedback loop to really flourish.
Section 3 is harmonizing ideologies through Hawen Sengseng. This third crisis tackles ideological discord. The source points a finger straight at utilitarianism, which is a system striving for the greatest good for the greatest number. But the fatal flaw? It frequently, and sometimes casually, sacrifices the minority to benefit the many.
Daesun thought solves this via a concept called haoen sangseng, which translates to the resolution of grievances for mutual benefit. The absolute crucial point here is that the text argues true public good is completely impossible to achieve if you leave people behind. True harmony only happens when the grievances of minorities are resolved first. To illustrate just how dangerous it is to ignore the few for the sake of some grand external goal, the text shares a haunting, prophetic poem from Singje. It actually predicted the tragic failure of the Donghak army. They ignored internal market efficiency and minority considerations for their big cause, and ultimately found their weapons completely useless, their movement destroyed in the winter snow.
This comparison highlights a core warning from Daesun thought that feels incredibly relevant today. If a system sacrifices the few for the many, it generates massive societal resentment. And the text notes something fascinating. Even if a single person harbors deep resentment, the energy of heaven and earth becomes blocked. The whole cycle jams up. True harmony absolutely requires minority consideration.
So here we see our recurring theme pop up again. Changing the order to consider minority rights first doesn't actually destroy the public good. It harmonizes our conflicting economic ideologies. It ensures that the cycle of mutual benefit is never broken by the friction of unresolved grievances. Finally, Section 4 is Overcoming Crisis via Dotong Jingyang. Let's explore our fourth, and honestly, arguably most existential crisis, devastating environmental collapse. This, the text argues, is brought about by a brand of communitarianism that prioritizes human communities but is completely devoid of any consideration for nature itself. The alternative proposed here is Dotong Jingyang, or the perfection of Tao. This introduces what the author calls a trending communitarianism. It basically recognizes that goods and the environment itself have an inherent cyclical flow. They have a distinct trending nature that we absolutely must respect. It is all about finding harmony between the powerful and the powerless, and between humans and their environment.
This dynamic is perfectly illustrated in the text by the historical parable of Sin Gyonghan. He was a tavern owner who profited heavily off the local youths, but when those same youths fell into poverty, he just coldly neglected them. And the result? The neglected community literally exploded in anger. They rushed in and smashed his business to pieces. Neglecting the weak completely broke the cycle and led straight to ruin.
Conversely, we have this profoundly beautiful quote. Sangje noted this when he was actually calming down a disciple's anger. He said, "What one would weed out as evil all turns out to be grass. What one takes with goodness all turns out to be flowers." If we speak well of others and act with goodness toward our community and our environment, virtue builds up, it circulates, and it ends up prospering the entire community, allowing it to bloom rather than burn.
And for the final time in our analysis, we have to change the order by one step. By proactively protecting the weak majority first, whether that means marginalized people or the silent natural environment, we prevent disaster and preserve the communal ecosystem that sustains us all.
By mapping these four tenets together, we get a highly comprehensive structural blueprint. The source material argues that this is exactly how we fix the straight, broken, dead-end lines of modern Western economics. We restore motivation, ethics, ideologies, and our environment simply by bending those lines back into healthy, continuous cycles.
If there is one single thing to take away from this explainer, it is this beautifully simple rule that governs the entire cycle across all four pillars. In Daesun thought, for oneself to prosper, one need only give first. It's not about losing out. It's about confidently starting the engine of circulation.
As we wrap up our analysis of this fascinating source material, I want to leave you with a final thought to reflect on as you navigate your own economic reality. If you change the order of your life by just one step today, giving before receiving, how would your cycle transform tomorrow? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the structures around you.